All right, so ready to dive into something different this time.
Always up for a challenge. What do we got?
So we were looking at this. Well, it's a pretty interesting text we found, and it asked this question: what if God smoked cannabis?
Wow. Okay, right out of the gate. I like it.
Yeah, it's not your typical deep dive topic, but that's kind of the point, right? I mean, how often do you really stop and think about something like that?
It's definitely not something you hear every day. And to be honest, my first reaction is, well, it's a bit jarring, but it's also kind of brilliant, Forces you to confront some pretty big questions head on.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here, digging into the ideas that make you think differently. So I guess the first question is, where do we even begin to unpack something like this?
Well, I think we got to start with the question itself. Like, what are the different ways we can even interpret it? Because on the surface, it sounds kind of irreverent, maybe even a little disrespectful, depending on your beliefs.
Right, definitely.
But is it really meant to be taken literally? Or is it more of a philosophical thought experiment? Like a way of questioning how we put limits on what we think God can or can't do?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, who are we to say what God does or doesn't do?
Exactly. And then there's the whole cannabis aspect of it, which adds another layer,
Definitely.
Because even that's something that's constantly evolving. Like our perceptions of cannabis, its uses, whether it's good or bad, it's all over the map, right?
Totally. And it varies so much from culture to culture, too.
Exactly. So maybe this question is also a way of highlighting how our own biases and cultural norms influence how we view even the most fundamental questions about the divine.
That's a really interesting point. And it kind of makes you wonder, historically speaking, have there been other instances where, altered states of consciousness have played a role in religion or spirituality?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look throughout history 100%. And cultures all over the world have incorporated altered states into their spiritual practices. Like shamans, for example, they used hallucinogenic plants to communicate with spirits and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And Sufi mystics use whirling dances to achieve a state of spiritual ecstasy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the connection between altered states and the divine, it's definitely not a new thing.
That's a really good point. Yeah. It puts things in a whole new perspective. So then when we apply that kind of historical context to this question, does it change how we view it? Do we see it as less shocking, or does it deepen the complexity even more?
I think it does both, honestly. On the one hand, it shows that, well, humans have been exploring the divine through these unconventional methods for a really long time. But on the other hand, it also brings up the whole debate about what considered acceptable or holy within a specific religious context, right? Can an omnipotent being even partake in something that some people consider taboo or even sinful?
Right. It really makes you question those boundaries we put on the divine, doesn't it? Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you think different faiths would view this whole concept?
Well, I imagine reactions would be pretty diverse, to say the least. Some faiths might see this question as deeply disrespectful or even, blasphemous. The idea of God, smoking cannabis. It might just be too much for them to reconcile with their beliefs.
Right.
But then you might have other faiths that are more open to interpreting it metaphorically, maybe they'd see it as God finding a way to connect with creation, to experience the world in a way that humans do.
Well, that's an interesting take.
Right. Or maybe it even challenges the whole notion of a perfect God. Does God have to be perfect in the way that we understand perfection?
Whoa, that's pretty deep when you think about it.
It is, right. And maybe that's the point of this whole question. Maybe it's not about getting a definitive answer. Maybe it's just about getting us to think differently about these really big concepts.
I like that. It's about the exploration, not necessarily the destination. So, with that in mind, I'm curious, how does this question sit with you personally? And just to be clear to everyone listening, there's no judgment here. No right or wrong answers, just honest reflections.
For me, honestly, it's a bit of a mind bend. I mean, it definitely challenges some of my preconceived notions, but at the same time, I kind of appreciate the audacity of the question, It forces me to re-examine my own beliefs and ask myself why I believe what I believe.
That's such an important point. We're constantly bombarded with information, and it's easy to just accept things at face value. But taking the time to grapple with unconventional questions, especially about our beliefs, it can be really valuable.
Absolutely. It's in those moments of questioning, of challenging our assumptions, that we really grow.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to leave our listeners with something to ponder. If this question sparked your curiosity, What other unconventional questions could we be asking about our own beliefs about the world around us? Keep that curiosity alive.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, that's it. Okay. Well. Okay. Whose fathers are secretly superheroes. That's not true. It fucking...
Okay, so today we're going to be diving into Between the Worlds.
Okay.
And specifically, we're looking at excerpts from the Crimson Clock and the Emerald Hood chapters. And right off the bat, these stories take us to Barrie, Ontario. Which, you know, seems like a pretty ordinary place, right?
Right.
But, as we're going to see, things aren't always as they appear to be. So, what really struck you about...
Okay, so... the stream hasn't heard that one. What? Which one is which?
Buckle up, listeners, because today, sharp turn. Imagine, you're at a party, maybe sneaking an extra slice of cake when you should be making...